simple off-grid getaway cabin seems to be a hot idea these days. An escape to the hunting cabin in the woods, or get away from the world for a short break, or permanent, or maybe you're looking to build a tiny cabin for just 1 or 2 people, or you're looking for a huge mortgage-free dream cabin for a large family. Well, in this video I hope to cover all that and more. In this video I will explain how with zero experience I built 4 off-grid simple cabins, each one unique in its own way. A tiny 8x8 log A-frame, a 12x16 dimensional lumber A-frame, a 16x16 log cabin that I built onto the side of a single wide trailer, and finally a large 36x36 log cabin for my entire family with a huge loft. Let's start with the very first cabin I built, the 16x16. So for me, I had enough of the big city, the noise, and the congestion. I needed a life with peace and quiet and a safe place to raise kids, and a simple cabin was a must. This was the first ever structure I had ever built, and with zero experience. I did buy a few books, but that's it. So I would just basically learn about each step in the process before I did it. So before peeling the logs, I studied just how to do that. And what I found was the least back-breaking method was using a long-handled peeling spud. I seasoned these logs on this cabin, waited almost a full year, rotated them once a month. Later found out that wasn't even necessary, which I'll explain in the next cabin. This foundation is extremely simple. Anyone can do it with a shovel, a hammer, some nails, and some string. First I had to pick where on the original house I wanted to attach a cabin. Since the backyard has the water lines, underground, and the septic system, I decided the best place was right in front where the door was. So I centered it on the door, and I had to mark off its size, which is a 16x16. Then mark where each of the 8 perimeter piers would be. I did 3 in the back, 3 in the front, and 1 on each side, basically in the gap. I also ended up later adding 1 in the very center of the foundation as a support pier for a floor beam that ran under the center of the floor joist. This beam, which you can't see now, is on top of a pier in the middle and anchored at each end on these side piers. I could really only work on it about once a week, and sometimes not even that, especially if I had to save up the money for the next portion of the materials. If someone had a few thousand saved up and a lot of time on their hands, then you could easily have this built in less than a month. Times were tough then, and I was working a lot, but I'm so thankful for this build because it taught me so much. It gave me the confidence to build the next monster cabin. So on this, all we have is pictures. It's almost 13 years ago when I did this, believe it or not. I did put a couple of short clips on YouTube of this build, but unfortunately I can't find any of them. Who knows, it might be the first log cabin being built on YouTube. My son has used an app to make them move a little bit for your enjoyment, as you can probably already tell. This is not me doing no hands driving trick in the skid steer, by the way. But in the end, this cabin addition worked out perfectly and just in time for our second child being born. We needed more room and I needed to practice building a cabin. It's been a great service to us over the years. The next cabin in this video is built the exact same way, but I have videos for this one. The next build is the log house we all live in now, soon to be 9 of us, plus 2 dogs. This one was finally my chance to test my skills and build the dream home we had always wanted, the reason we moved out to the middle of nowhere to homestead and live off-grid. This was to be a 36x36 with a 13x36 loft, 5 bedroom, 1 bath with huge family room and open kitchen plan. This foundation is very similar, just massive compared to the other cabin. This one had more than triple the piers and it was on a pretty good slope. I had to dig some, grade some, and hand build all the pyramid style pier forms. This alone took a couple of months from breaking ground to the pour. But this time I had some money saved and I had a lot of time on my hands. I had no work and a lot of time because this was during 2020. I built this to a live-in state in, believe it or not, only 9 months. We broke ground late 2020 and we moved in before the holidays 2021. One way I knew the form would fit in the hole was by making a template the size of that the base would be. Building the form was just not actually too difficult. I had a system where I would first cut all the plywood one day and the next few days assemble each of them. Each one is lined with plastic so they would slip off easier when it came time to remove them. Once I had them set and level in the holes, I reinforced them with bracing all the way around to prevent any blowout during the pour. Again, I'm doing a button pass style method of log building, and these rebar pins are not for reinforcing concrete, but instead to set the first course of logs down onto. The pour went well, took about an hour from start to finish. I had to hire a pumper truck because the size of my foundation and uniqueness of my build site, the regular cement trucks would not be able to reach the furthest piers, so the trucks had to supply the concrete to the pumper, and then the hose would reach everywhere that we needed it to. Before getting the first log, I needed to clean up the build site, re-slope everything, remove all the excess dirt, and cover it with gravel. I think total maybe was about 25 tons of gravel I had delivered. Again, a little skid steer comes in handy. I also had to divert water. So I did a couple of ditches where one main one was on the high side to ensure that any standing water between the structures after a good hard rain would not find its way under my house into my foundation, but it's instead drain off the property to a low side. We dug a ditch that progressively gets deeper as it exits the property, lined with gravel, and then with a perforated pipe down inside of it, and then covered with more gravel. Works perfect. I never had any moisture under the house in the last 3 years since the build. When I went to remove the forms from the piers, it took me a few hours to remove just one side, and I was physically spent. So I came up with a better plan. I enlisted the skid steer and a piece of chain, and voila, just yank them out. Now that the foundation is resloped, water runoff is handled, and gravel is down, it's time to add the finishing touches to the piers and make them ready for the logs. I cut green board and some roofing material to set on top of each pier. This prevents moisture from wicking up. One thing I wish I did on this was add flashing under the green board, like I did on the first cabin. I messed up here. Okay, so now that that's all done, it's time to get the logs. When looking for logs, you typically want the tallest and the straightest. That's pretty understandable, right? Well, in my case, free was best, and it happened that my neighbor wanted all his non-producing persimmon trees gone. If I didn't take them, he was just going to bulldoze them over and burn them and make room for his cattle. So I gratefully said, yes, thank you. I realized most of them were crooked, and every single one of them weighed more than twice as much as the poplar logs I used on a previous cabin. It made for an interesting learning experience, to say the least. This yellow cone you see me using here is amazing, and anyone doing anything similar to what I did, I highly suggest adding this to your tool list. It allows you to drag a log through almost any terrain and anything and never get stuck. Whether you use a tractor, a vehicle, or a four-wheeler, this will make the job easier. I'm not sponsored by them, I just really enjoy tools that do what they say they do. Peeling was essentially the same as before, except these were mostly peeled during the colder months, which made it a little harder. The bark really clings to the trees more than in the hotter months. The size of these logs required a template to be made to make sure all my holes were drilled exactly where they needed to be before I set them down over the foundation to kind of thread the needle. The template is a long scrap board with some cardboard cutouts and holes drilled in, and then a wax pencil is used to mark the tops of the rebar. This little trick I learned from the Log Home Builders Association. Great place. I will leave their link in the description box below as well. It's very satisfying when that first log goes on smooth. What a relief. Now with the confidence that first one's on, I can go get the rest of them and get this first course finished up. Just a matter of getting back into the woods and looking for the next tree. Peeling it, maneuvering into place, drilling holes, and setting it onto the foundation. As you can see with this build, I didn't season the logs. I simply cut, debarked, and set it on the foundation the very same day. This is definitely the way to go. Between the two, I wish I had done this previously. Sometimes due to the crookedness of the tree, I had to use a skid steer to gently force it where I needed it to be before pinning it down. Rebar spikes were hammered in every couple of feet, every single course of logs. I doubt anything could ever pull this house apart. You get real creative while you're dragging, pulling, lifting logs all around your build site. Chains, straps become a necessity. The days became repetitive, getting a log, peeling it, stacking it, rinse and repeat. But as the building gets taller and bigger, it really drives you to keep going. After I had the wall logs up, I needed to pressure wash them, making them ready for the roof. These large gaps you see here between the logs are really no issue. They don't look pretty now, but they will disappear later in the video. If you want almost zero gaps in this style of building, then get perfectly straight logs with very little taper from end to end. One cool thing is the more you correctly use a chainsaw, the better you get at felling trees. But then don't get so confident, because that's when mistakes like this happen. I don't advise anyone take chainsaw lessons from me. So here I am putting up the support logs for the girder log. This will hold up the front end of the loft floor. There will be one on each far wall and then two in the middle sitting on the piers. These are pinned with rebar at the top through the girder. The ones on the ends are pinned to the log walls, and I'm totally confident in its strength. Again, these are all persimmon logs. Every single one of them in this build is persimmon. If you didn't know, persimmon has a Janka hardness score of 2300, which is higher than hickory. It's extremely durable and has some of the highest crushing and bending strengths of all hardwoods. It's been used in golf club heads, and your tools better be extremely strong and sharp to work with it. Not to mention it's extremely heavy, and in my case, kind of crooked. So, the largest persimmon I had to get was for the ridge pole, which is the log that extends the entire length of your roof line. It holds up the entire roof. It needs to be the strongest and the straightest log of all. Wasn't sure if I was even going to make it out of these woods. Did I mention how heavy persimmon is? But thankfully my old K1500 pickup truck managed. As I started to lift heavier logs, I needed to add weight to the back of my skid steer so it wouldn't flip over on me. This got pretty interesting. So what I'm putting up now is just a brace that will help me hold up other logs until I set them perfectly in place and lock them down. Now that the ridge pole is up there on top of the walls, it's waiting to be hoisted. I can start setting the RPSLs. I made a mistake in placement of this particular rebar pin. So this pin needs to come off and I need to replace it with another one. And this concrete adhesive works great for this job. I measured how tall I needed this particular RPSL, which is also known as the ridge pole support log, had to be, and I cut a section or a slice off the bottom. And now I used that slice as a template for where my new hole needed to be on the pier. So I marked the center, drilled a hole through it, and then placed that slice back onto the pier and marked where the hole needed to be drilled. Then I put that slice back onto the bottom of the RPSL I cut it off of, and I drilled a hole straight through it, the depth that I needed, into the base of that log. Chain hoists are awesome inventions. For a good part of the build, these were like my extra laborers. Learn how to use one of these and you can move just about anything. So now you should be able to see about how this grid of logs above me is working as support bracing while I maneuver logs into their final position. I was even able to use the ridge pole to help me hoist. Now I needed to get some longer logs for lifting poles. This is where you use a log that is taller than the highest point you need to lift something to. You use the chain hoist attached to the top of these lifting poles, and you should be able to lift anything you want. I was using this to lift the heaviest, which is probably my 5,000 pound log, which is the ridge pole, into position to sit it atop of the ridge pole support logs, or RPSLs, which there's 3 of them. Now I can begin doing the roof framing, and after speaking with an engineer regarding my 24-foot rafter spans, I decided to sister 2 2x10s to create the dimensional 4x10 I needed to make the span. Glued, screwed, and nailed, these were fun to build, but not fun to lift into place. I needed a quick break. It's nice to take one every once in a while and be thankful for the life you're living, what you're doing, and who's in your life. You know, just give all praise to God for all your blessings. Making these 2x10 sandwiches became like an assembly line. It got easier as time went on. I had to make 28 of them altogether. The hoist wasn't listed for the job. First I had to manhandle them into position, then anchor the hoist to something nearby and start working the chain. Once I got it up onto the ridgepole, I needed to screw them down just enough so they wouldn't fall. But this is in no way the final pinning of them. Once they're all up there, I'll be pounding rebar through them and bolting them together.
Nice work.
Once they were all in position, both at the log wall and at the ridgepole, I needed to bolt them and pin them. Once that was done, I added hurricane ties to each rafter where they sit on the log wall. And I also pinned them to the log wall with rebar. This roof is as solid as it gets. Now with that done, it's time for a very exciting part, the sheathing. I chose boards because it's easier for one person and will look better from the inside, since this is going to be an exposed cathedral ceiling. Take your time to pick, if you're going to do an exposed ceiling, what your finished inside is going to look like. Now for these, I chose some secondhand 1x10 pine boards because they still looked beautiful, they were in great shape, and I got them at a huge discount. They did have some defects, but it was nothing that I couldn't work around. When starting your sheathing, it's good to establish a straight line first, so a chalk line, or in my case I use a string line, which I was able to align my first course of boards to. I did it at the bottom, so I'd have a nice clean straight line at my roof's edge. And if it's a little off at the top, no big deal, I can fudge that, and it actually will never be seen, because an inch or a half an inch here and there is not a big deal when you have a 14-inch thick ridge pole hiding all that. Doing the straight line and laying down the first set of boards will make life a lot easier laying out the rest of the boards as you go up. I tried to stagger the joints as well, which makes for a stronger roof. In some cases, due to a few of these boards being warped, I had to use a strap to force the board straight, then nail it down tight. Once you get the ceiling, the sheathing up, you can see how it's coming along now. The finish line is approaching. You can feel it. So yeah, there's lots of knot holes, yes, but no worries. My underlayment will take care of that. Wait and see. So because of the staggering of the joints, and because I'm human and I make mistakes, the edges need cleaned up, but this is a typical case, and it's why you leave extra on the ends, so that you can come back and make the lines clean and straight and uniform. I'm not sure if everyone does it this way, but it seemed like a good back-saving idea to slide down and cut as I went. I don't know. Let me know down in the comments how you guys do this cut. Now this underlayment and the foam boards I used for the roof, I also found secondhand, and actually they're like leftover from job sites or from teardowns. And this was sold at a huge discount place. I did have to travel about 10 hours one way to get these, but I saved thousands of dollars. This was well worth it. I'll include the link below in the description box. If you're anywhere near the state of Indiana and you're doing this, I suggest you contact them. The underlayment is self-healing peel and stick. The foam insulation boards are polyiso, they're 4x8 and almost 4 inches thick. I had to create a crib type of system to contain the insulation boards, only in an area where insulation is needed, of course, because it's not needed over the overhangs. So instead, I had to build it up to the same height to where the insulation would be, so once I put the purlins on and the grid system that the metal is going to attach to, everything was the same height. This allows for airflow, and also I built it so that if any moisture was to get in or condensation, it would have a place to drip down and away and out off the roof. When installing metal roofing, it's always good to start on the end away from the prevailing winds. This ensures wind, driven rain, wind itself, and snow blows over the side lap seam joints and not under them and into your roof system. Now that the roof is done, I can work around the house and inside of it weather-free. After deciding where your doors and windows will go, it's time to cut the holes in all of your hard handiwork. It's okay, just make sure you know exactly what size you need. And first, actually, you can cut them a little smaller if you just need to get inside and bring materials in for the time being. You don't have to cut them the exact size just yet. I use the Sawzall to cut the rebar pins in between the logs, and a chainsaw, of course, for the logs. So this floor system is going to be similar to the last one, where the rim joists are attached to the first course of logs, but these also sit on top of the foundation piers, which makes it a lot stronger. I then measured out where each joist would go and started attaching joist hangers and hanging the joist. The floor framing actually went pretty quick in this build. The beams that went down the middle kind of split the span, and this was the hardest part of the floor framing, but other than that, it went pretty smooth. Right up until I fell through the floor. You know, working those long hours and you lose a little bit of focus, make a wrong step here and there, and things like this happen. Thankfully I didn't get hurt, but I had to put back up the hardware cloth underneath that I fell through. I kind of destroyed some things, but no big deal. I could have just edited this out, but I left it in for your enjoyment, so you can thank me down in the comments for that if you enjoyed that. So just lay in the fiberglass, staple, slap down the plywood, nail it down, and boom, you have a floor. Time to dance. Nope, actually it's time to lay the tar paper down, then the solid wood flooring on top of that. Building window frames is pretty straightforward. Installing them into log walls with rebar, not so much. It's fun though, and I think simpler in my opinion. I've done both, and I would much rather install in a log wall. The doors I made from scrap foam and scrap lumber. I used forged strap hinges to hang the doors with, and I got them from the same eBay blacksmith guy, actually when I built the door for my first cabin almost 13 years ago, believe it or not. The floor joists for the loft floor are 2x8s, and they're spaced 12 inches on center, and I set them into notches on both ends. The span only being 12'6", this floor is stout. It's covered with 3/4 inch plywood and now has interlocking rubberized mats for cushion and noise reduction. Framing, sheathing, and insulating the gable walls is just like any other wall, except I had to work around the ridgepole. Now it's time to bring in the wood stove. This 400-pound monster took a ride on the skid steer. Then from there it was placed onto cardboard and simply slid through the house near its final resting place. The stove hearthboard was made from sheetrock and tile, and cutting a hole in the roof of your newly built house, yeah, it's never a fun thing to do, but in this case it had to be done, and man, I love a wood stove in a cabin, so there was no way around it. The trick I found was that once you measure and choose the exact spot where the stovepipe will go, you drill a hole dead center right up through the roof, poke out the metal, and then do all your cutting and measuring off of that hole. Worked perfect. Now, I would never claim to be a framer, but Literally, I just measured how I wanted the rooms to lay out and started cutting, nailing, and screwing. Let's face it, these are not part of the structural strength of this house. The log shell with the ridgepole and the RPSLs is as strong as it'll ever be, regardless of any internal 2x4 framing, that's for sure. They just needed to be plumb, secured, and in the right place for doors and partitions. Once the insulation is hung, it's time to sheathe the walls. I chose rough sawn lumber for this. I like the rustic look and simplicity of it. The kitchen I had to customize. I made the cabinets and counters from a 2x4 frame, some 3/4 inch plywood, and some rough sawn large boards for the top. Some of the tiles that matched the hearth were added to the backsplash, but later we removed that and replaced that with some really nice thick live edge walnut, which you might see in this video towards the end. We added a propane stovetop and a couple of deep laundry room sinks, and boom, we had what we needed. I later made cabinets from scrap pieces of 1x10 left over from roof sheathing. The stairs are steep, I'm not going to lie, and a few of us have fallen once or twice before I put up a railing, but this is where they needed to be, and I didn't really want a massive staircase taking up half the living space. Nobody went to the hospital, it's all good, and on one side we have this nice little extra bookshelf. Okay, time to say goodbye to the foam. So this tool for chinking, for cutting the foam, is something I made with a hacksaw blade and with 2 chunks of wood for the handles. It saws right through the foam with ease, works around humps and dips. You can also use a bent butter knife. Either one will work perfect. I cut back the foam just enough to leave room for the nails and then the mortar. The mortar will not stick to wood or foam, so you have to drive nails in every few inches so you can hang it to it. It's a very satisfying job, but very dirty, kind of a love-hate thing as I mentioned before. Once the chinking is done, it looks fantastic. With the kitchen mostly done and ready for use, we needed water supply. I decided to catch rain. Using my huge new metal roof, I added a gutter to one side and set up some 275-gallon tanks. We currently can collect about 1,000 gallons in about 20 minutes of good rainfall. You want to cover them with something black, and this keeps them from growing algae inside and ruining the water. Just wrap it like a present and stuff it back into its cage. I also made a first flush catch pipe to collect the first bit of rainfall. This collects, at least it's supposed to, all the debris and some bird poop, whatever was on the roof first as the rain hits it. It collects in there and then diverts the clean water onto the tanks. We of course filter whatever we use for drinking and cooking through a reverse osmosis system. That takes everything out. If you have concerns about drinking water, and you don't realize how dangerous all available water is in the world today, then you might want to watch one of my water videos, and I'll leave that in the description box below as well. When I was putting up the purlins for the gable end walls, you want to install them so that if moisture does form behind whatever your wall covering is, it has a way to drip down and away and leave your wall system and not sit there and rot or penetrate into your inside. So I put them at an angle, as you can see. I tossed around the idea of board and battens like I did on the other cabin, but I really liked metal and how easy and fast it was to install and how long lasting it is, so metal's what I went with. Now we're just finishing up the chinking on the outside to kind of wrap this whole place in. No more foam, and boom, it's beautiful. This next build is actually my son's cabin, which he was only 12 when he started this. I helped, but honestly, he wanted to do most of it himself. After watching and helping me on the big log house, he was excited to tackle this. His foundation was real simple. Just 4 holes with a post hole digger, 4 cedar posts, left long enough to measure off a level area, and then set them in concrete. Let that cure. This is going to be an 8x8 cabin, and to figure out the height of each post on a seriously sloped piece of land, it's easy. After they're set up in the concrete, just choose the highest corner, that is highest ground area of the foundation, and measure up minimum 12 inches for clearance for snow, etc. from the bottom of the cabin. Then use a string level to level and mark the 3 other posts according to that first one. Then carefully cut them to height. He used cedar and poplar logs for this build. Both are light and easy to work with. He also did a button pass style, so cutting the logs, peeling them, and stacking them was his first order of business. He's not of driving age, so all his trees were relatively close by, within a few hundred yards, give or take, and he had to devise a system to get them home. In some cases, he used a rope and just dragged them. Most of the time, he carried them. Sometimes he flipped them end over end, all the way back to the build site. Now, instead of rebar, he used 12-inch spikes. These spikes came in handy as temporary holding braces for the logs as he set them onto the wall. He was alone a lot and had to get creative in lots of ways to create other hands that weren't there. So right here, he actually took a big hit to the rib cage from setting this log down at a bad angle. He edited that part out, but he was hurting bad for a bit. But he toughed it out and got right back to work. By the way, he's the editor of most all my videos on this channel. He's a pretty talented kid, and we are very proud of him. Thank God he didn't have any real injuries while doing this build. He did have another painful mishap, though, which is coming up, so stay tuned. Once the log wall height was where it needed to be, it was time to add the rafters, which are basically the roof and the wall for this A-frame. We had to set the ridge board up first, and I'm in the back holding this contraption up while he's screwing down the 2x4 that's holding up the ridge board.
We did it!
And now once the angles are cut on the rafters, he can attach the rafters to the ridge board and anchor them onto the log wall. The string level you see here is that so that each rafter is at the same height, so when attaching the metal it'll lay flat and not be wavy, of course. He needed some cross bracing to tie the rafters together, making the roof much stronger. On these gaps he used an old-time method of mud daubing, which is also known as chinking. But instead of mortar, he was mixing clay, dirt, and straw, which we have a lot of both. You just stuff it into the gaps, it dries hard and holds. So he's putting up the 2x4 purlins right now, spaced evenly, and this is what the metal will be attached to. Make sure you don't set the top purlin all the way to the top, or you'll close off that gap, which is where you want hot air to escape if, of course, you're going to do a ventilated roof or a ridge vent that allows hot air to get out. We decided a solar light plus one clear panel will be all he would need for lots of light in this cabin. He also has one window that we're going to be installing later in the video. Like my cabin, he also installed a rim joist in the first log at the bottom, but instead of hanging the joist in them, he set them on top of them for more strength. Insulation is basically the same, except we covered the bottom afterwards. Now watch closely. He's about to have a mishap, and we did not plan this. It's actually nuts that it happened because we literally joked about it just before he started working on the floor. He was like, "Dad, remember when you fell through?" He did get some bruises from this, but he's fine, nothing broken. And I went in and basically fixed the tear out that he did when he fell through the floor. And but then he was back to work shortly after that. Next, he needed to cut the logs out where the door would be hung. So he set up some saw guides and went for it. Once that was cut, we shoved the pre-cut plywood into place, and he maneuvered it around, hammered it down into submission, and screwed it down. So this window I got for free from a barn teardown I did years ago. And this was sitting in a corner full of dust, and it's finally getting use now. Now that the door frame is done, he has to build a door to fit in there. He went with the dimensional lumber 2x6. Basically just edge glued them and braced it. These strap hinges did the trick. They're bought at Lowe's, I think we did. And you do a little shim at the bottom to kind of cram it into place and hold it for you, and then he was able to mark out where the hinges needed to go and screw them into place. The outside of his walls are covered with just tar paper, and then over that, rough sawn lumber. Just provides a real simple rustic look, like a shell, a wall covering that will protect him from weather and big critters getting in. That's all he needed. And after burning the staircase in the house, he liked that look so much that he decided that's how he wanted to finish the look of his door, and he wanted to add one more touch to it. And this is probably my favorite part. It shows my son has his priorities right. Now the wood stove we used worked okay for a few fires, but I would not suggest this one at all. We are currently looking for a better one for this cabin. It was just not working out after several fires. Wouldn't draft right, built up creosote really fast, even with good wood, so no thanks. We'll be looking for another one in the future. He wanted to go with a little homemade space saver table and a stool, and he's basically ready for a meal in his new place. I have 6 kids and one more on the way, and 5 of them right now all know how to build and make a fire from scratch without a lighter or matches. Several of them know how to cook for themselves as well. Kids are much more capable than people realize. This generation, for the most part, has been pampered. Sorry to say that, and I'm scared to see what comes of it. Honestly, it's actually already frightening. My kids, all of them, will be God-fearing, useful, independent human beings. Guaranteed. Alright, this is the last cabin. It's an A-frame. It's 12 by 16 and by far the simplest, quickest one of all. We cleared the build site in just an hour or so, roughly measured and marked the layout, then using the 3-4-5 method, squared it up. To double check this method, you can measure from one corner to the other and mark down what that measurement is, and then do the same thing from the opposite corner and see if you're close. If not, then you'll have a foundation that's not square and that needs resolved. This was also a pier foundation, but a little different this time, and on one corner we have bedrock, which is kind of cool. You'll see why later. But I decided to anchor to this corner of the building to the cornerstone. The rest would be set on pre-poured piers that I thankfully had forethought to pour these for later use. This was actually the excess concrete from my large cabin build. I made a box with partitions in it, like right before they showed up, and they basically poured all the excess concrete that they had to get out of the pumper truck. They didn't want to leave it in there. So we just poured it into this box, and I leveled out as best I can, and then I dumped these hangers in there and set them in each one of these little boxes. And now 3 years later, we have all these piers available for this project. It was perfect. So we dug the holes, set the blocks in, and poured concrete around them. Once that was cured, I was able to cut little sections of 4x4 to raise each pier up to the level each one needed to be. Each one was slightly different, but when you have your string levels up, you just bring them up to there, measure off of each other, and boom, you got a level pier foundation ready for the beams. These beams will support the joist. After marking where each joist will go, it was just a matter of bringing them in and nailing them in place. Me and the kids knocked this out pretty quick. Neat. Slide it in right on this next mark. Good boy. All right. You are correct. Yes. Foundation. All right, good. The chainsaw made quick work of the ends hanging over. For most of this, it's pretty self-explanatory. I hope at the very least I inspired a few of you to tackle one of these on your own. You can see I really didn't know what I was doing, and I learned as I went. Motivation and a no-quit attitude will get you a long ways. That's guaranteed. Boom. So I put a little blocking in between the joists to help eliminating bouncing in the floor. And instead of insulation on this build, I did a little experiment. I saw a few other YouTubers doing this and I thought, why not? I'm not going to explain all the benefits yet because I don't know how well it will work, but I will do an update video maybe a year from now. Okay, so check back with me. This foil bubble was so easy and clean to use compared to fiberglass or foam. The underneath is absolutely rodent proof, that's for sure. Because on top of this, I put down tongue and groove Advantech flooring, and then I put on vinyl flooring over top of that. When putting down Advantech, it's important to stagger the joints by installing either a half sheet first or then alternating between a half and a full. You choose, it depends on the size of your floor really. You just don't want seams lining up. Okay. Boom. All right. Yeah. There we go.
There.
You good? Oh yeah. Okay, good. Okay, now go up. Okay, down. Down a couple times, it should come off. There's just a little.
Oh yeah.
Okay, there we go. Bingo!
Yes!
Nice work. Which is you measure from diagonal to diagonal and make sure those numbers match up. You're good to go. The rest of the cabin will be level and square. Then I covered the entire floor with one large sheet of vinyl flooring. Now building the rafters, which are also going to be the walls, was kind of fun. They were like giant jaws. I built them as a set and then reinforced the tops with a plywood sandwich. Like I had them. There you go. Pull it gently. We stood them up into position and nailed them down into the sill plate, one set after another after another. And so as we went, we braced them to each other to hold them into place, and within a few hours, we were done. I braced them all for a couple of days because I wasn't able to work on the cabin for a little bit, and we had some weather coming in. Next, my son Samson and I needed to run foil bubble up over the top of each rafter pair. I decided I could start a few feet up and then screw in a purlin, climb up, put them up, staple up again, put another purlin in, like a ladder system, and it worked pretty well. We got that as done as we could before the weather moved in, and we had to take a break for a few days, and during this break we got some other jobs done. One being the railing on the staircase. We used a dead standing cedar tree, believe it or not, for this railing. It had the perfect bend in it, That and some rebar, and boom, we have a nice rustic little railing. After the weather cleared up, we went back to the cabin. I had to fix some of the staples. We had to clean out some wind-driven snow, but nothing major. We stapled everything back down and just basically getting the finishing touches done. When it was dry, taped the seams, final touches, and now we're ready for metal. So we're putting the metal up, and we did everything in one day. We had a beautiful day. All the metal went up perfectly. We even had time to move in the weight bench and start framing some of the gable walls. Great productive day. The 3 windows I got for this cabin were off from a secondhand store, and I got all 3 of them for only $150. They're actually brand new. They're just like leftovers from a job site. The gable walls finished will be similar to my son's cabin, except they're going to have insulation and have interior finish too. So this is basically tar paper exterior with rough sawn boards, and then the inside will be rock wool, tar paper, rough sawn lumber again. The door on this build, I decided to do exactly the same style my son did for his cabin. I even let him burn it this time for me too. How's it look?
Good.
Oh yeah. Let's see. Hello. I decided it would be a good idea to add some bird feeding areas and some bird nesting areas. And what do you know, they moved right in actually shortly after I built these. we need now is some steps, and the cornerstone chapel is done. So I hope this maybe helps some of you see that your dreams are possible no matter what size cabin you're after and your experience level. If you do want to see any of these full builds, click on this playlist right here on the screen. Before you go, please like the video and leave us a comment. Let me know which part you like the most. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video. God bless.